Good morning, fellow panelists, fellow South Africans, members of the media, and thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the events of the past few days have provided frightening clarity about the circumstances under which we all live as South Africans. On the one hand, we have people who have emerged from our painful past into 27 years of economic mismanagement and months of lockdown. We have witnessed political leaders loot with impunity who survive on the periphery of our society in every way. They have no stake in our economy, whether it grows or declines, because they live in a country where entire generations have never known the dignity of work and ownership. On the other hand, we have businesses that have weathered and navigated the myriad of barriers that government has placed in their path. They have traversed the failed policies of BEE, rigid labor laws, policy ambiguity, and load shedding. They have weathered months of lockdown with little or no help from our government. Many of these businesses, big and small, black-owned and white-owned, have survived all of this only now to be finished off by mobs of rioters and looters, burning their trucks, blocking the highways, breaking infrastructure, looting stock, and burning buildings to the ground. Let me be very clear. There's no excuse for this kind of criminality we have seen and experienced over the past days. None whatsoever. There's a difference between explaining the unrest and justifying it. I've seen people's lives go up in flames. I've watched as a mosque was burned down. I've read how our clinics have become like scenes of war where doctors must leave patients with serious injuries that may not survive. I've heard how families have hidden in their homes as mobs of criminals terrorize the streets, shooting guns in the air like it is a war zone. I've witnessed communities had to come together and protect their buildings, their property, and their people because law enforcement was nowhere to be seen. And yesterday, I witnessed how a few lightly armed brave policemen and women were abandoned in Alexander to fight off crowds of thousands without reinforcement or the South African National Defence Force. In the 27 years that I've proudly called myself a South African, I've never been as angry as I am today. I am angry because our government has produced the perfect storm of poverty, unemployment, racial inequality, hopelessness, and desperation that we have witnessed over the past few days. Does anyone truly believe this came out of nowhere? It arises from a government that has led by example only in terms of its greed, its criminality, its corruption, its blatant disregard of the law. It arises from a government that has produced an education system to rival Bantu education, that has produced a generation of young people who have no stake in our society and literally nothing to lose. It arises from a government whose party stood outside of Nkandla as a symbol of everything that is wrong with our politics and started these riots that continue today. Like many of you, I've had a difficult time over the past few days, not knowing whether to place to be anger about everything that I have witnessed. However, I'm reminded of a perspective that has arisen from the launch of ActionSA, which is South Africa and the ANC cannot coexist in mutual prosperity. Everything that South Africa has just experienced arises from the actions of the ANC and the inaction of our government. Let me repeat myself. The looting and the killing and the burning and the violence that South Africans have just experienced arises from the actions of the ANC and the inactions of our government. Make absolutely no mistake, the violence and disruption emerges directly and inextricably from the ANC. It was overtly designed and calculated to destabilize the country in a bid by a radical economic transformation faction in the ANC to challenge the incarceration of Jacob Zuma. You will recall that the riot's origins lie in those illegal gatherings outside Nkandla, where scores of ANC members from KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the Eastern Cape fired weapons without consequences in full view of the South African police services. It was here where the incendiary languages of revolution was conjured up deliberately, and the political emotions of the people of KwaZulu-Natal were wiped out in a frenzy for the narrow political agenda of this faction within the ANC. All of this was done precisely to generate fear, to make the law-abiding people of our country say, perhaps they should just let Jacob Zuma go. There's a word for this, and while this may be a politically loaded term in our country, it is called terrorism. But we are not just here because of the failings by the ANC, but also the failings of our government. Our president has extended the ultimate invitation to lawlessness in our country in the form of his weak, dithering, and indecisive leadership. At a time where our country needed leadership, we were deflated to watch a president repeatedly calling himself the commander-in-chief of our country. He did so in a failed bid to create the illusion of authority while speaking about the conditions in our country, as if he is powerless, and while criminals looted a South African blood bank facility. From a security perspective, this period of unrest has been unmitigated disaster. Our South African police services, either on instruction or by fear of reprisal, did nothing in response to the ANC crowds of lawbreakers outside of Nkandla, thereby setting the tone of law enforcement going forward. By any expert assessment, the move to deploy the South African Defence Force took place at least 24 hours too late and has been woefully inadequate. Our South African Defence Minister, Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula, defended the woefully inadequate deployment of South African Defence Force members yesterday as informed by the assessment of the situation on the ground. State Security Minister Yanda Tlolo has confirmed that they are investigating information as to whether senior former agents in the agency and senior ANC members aligned to former President Jacob Zuma are responsible for igniting the recent violence. Our crime intelligence services fundamentally failed to detect something that the average South African family witnessed and knew was coming. The South African police services have operated without sufficient resources, been left stranded without equipment or reinforcement, and having to keep crowds of thousands at bay. Where the South African police have acted with decisiveness was against law-abiding and panicked South Africans who were not adequately socially distanced. That is why today, ActionSA is making the following announcement. We are calling upon all South Africans who have lost their property, businesses, stores, and factories to come forward to ActionSA. They can do so through a webpage we have created specifically for this, named actionsa.org.za/your story. From these cases, we will be compiling a test case for South African legal system in which we will be suing the ANC, the president, the minister of police, and all the ministers of the security cluster, jointly and severally, for the loss and damage to property. We are convinced that we have a strong prospect of success of appealing to our judiciary that it is the actions and inactions of these parties that have directly caused the riotous behavior that has led directly to the loss and destruction of property. We will do this so that we can make sure that the ANC and government understand that the actions and inactions, respectively, will have consequences that they cannot afford. Before I conclude, I'd like to urge all South Africans to remember an important fact that has been forgotten in the chaos of the last few days. The vast majority of people in our country have not partaken in the violence and the looting. If you need to look for evidence of how good South Africans are, look no further than those who self-organized and formed groups to protect their communities and their community infrastructure. I would like to express my deepest appreciation to those who acted in defense of their communities when their government failed to do so spectacularly. The president's remark, this was an ethnic mobilization, was false. the majority of the Zulu-speaking people of our country share the same sense of outrage as everyone else about what has taken place. It is so often the case a minority holds the majority of our country to ransom. No matter how fearful we may be, no matter how easy it is for prejudice to take root, no matter how hope may be fading, please remember that the majority of South Africans of all languages, races, and creeds share your fears, your wish for peace, and want order in their country. Thank you.